Hi Zainab, hi Karen, hi Ludovica. Our first question, what is self-determination in learning?
So, self-determination in learning views learning more as a personal journey of the individual. It looks at the learner as an active agent in their own learning, where the learner has intrinsic motivation to actually learn and actively engages in his or her learning. The individual learner, when there is self-determination, is able to make choices about their learning. They are capable of setting their own learning goals. They can take initiative in gaining new knowledge and the skills needed to achieve their goals. And they're also capable of self-evaluating themselves with regards to the goals that they have set and the way that they are achieving their goals.
And what are the three basic psychological needs related to self-determination?
So, self-determination theory proposes that there are three psychological needs for all individuals in reality. The first one is that of autonomy, which relates to individuals having a sense of choice and control over the actions and decisions that they take in their lives. The second one is called competence, and it relates to the person feeling capable to master the tasks that they need to do in order to achieve the outcomes that they have set for themselves. And the third one is called relatedness, and it refers to the need for a personal connection with others, a sense of belonging, a sense of being part of something bigger, of a community, and forming positive relationships with others.
What are the benefits of fostering self-determination in the learning process, especially in the area of inclusion?
Well, when there is self-determination being practiced in a classroom, it means that the individual students have a better sense of ownership over their own learning, and they are much more engaged in their learning. And this obviously leads to an increase in motivation in learning, which means that students are going to also put in more effort and put in more persistence in the face of obstacles, of difficulties that they encounter. Various studies in this field have shown that there are various positive outcomes to self-determination practices in classrooms, like increase in self-confidence, increase in self-efficacy, increase in self-regulation for all students, not only for students with disabilities. But there are also studies, specific studies involving students with disabilities, including cognitive and learning disabilities, that are very, very encouraging, showing that when there is this increase in active participation and contribution and the possibility, the potential for choice making for these individuals, there is an increased sense of belonging also in the classroom, an increased sense of well-being, which in turn often also reduces behavioral issues that are often seen as problematic in the classroom and can lead to these students being moved out of the classroom rather than included with the rest of the activities of the class.
How does self-determination in learning impact academic achievement and long-term learning outcomes?
Well, this is an important question because often such efforts by teachers can be regarded as possibly a waste of time, especially when there is so much pressure relating to time to cover the content needed, especially when you have heavy standardized curricula and there are high stakes exams, maybe at the end of the academic year. But it's important also to keep in mind that when time is actually invested, because it is an investment of time, when time is invested in helping students to increase their sense of autonomy and control over their learning, well, the fruits of this is an increase in intrinsic motivation for learning, an increase in the capability of students setting themselves up towards more challenging goals, an increase in perseverance and persistence when facing challenging questions, when facing difficulties in their learning and studying, an improvement in their self-regulation skills like better time management, better learning and studying techniques and strategies, especially when they start learning more about who they are themselves as learners. There is often, because of this self-directedness and this increase in independence in learning also on their own and finding the things that interest them, well, their knowledge starts and understanding of the content starts becoming deeper. And they can easily connect or start connecting the new knowledge that they are acquiring at school with their prior experiences and the things that they are encountering as they are learning also things on their own. And when you take all of this together, these increase in various skills which are related to the content, but it's not just about the content anymore, well, obviously the academic performance is going to also improve. And it's not dependent on the teacher anymore. There is a shift kind of responsibility from the teacher having to provide you with everything, and if this is not covered step by step by the teacher, it's like students start feeling lost. And there is this shift of responsibility and power from the teacher to the learner to actually be responsible for what you want to know, for your own performance, for your own achievement. And
they learn to take the responsibility and the consequences.
Exactly.
So it makes the job of the teacher also easier.
Yes.
When you think
the teacher becomes more of a mentor. Yeah. Like the role shifts, becomes more of the person who can support you, who can guide you, and this often leads to an improvement in the achievement and the performance of students, even then in standardized testing and in graded exams.
And even like when they start their professional career,
yeah.
Because it becomes the way they learn, and the autonomy and the control and taking the responsibility, facing the consequences. In that way, in that sense, just becomes a part of the personality and the way they live, act.
It can be seen as something which is important for lifelong learning in reality, because you are setting them up for the possibility for lifelong learning.
So what type of motivation leads to self-determination in learning?
So when we think about motivation, it is the action that we are moved into and the force that we are moved into. And when we think about the old ways of motivation, it is more like being under stress, control, and it's coming from external sources. And in self-determination learning, or in this theory, it says it should be because of internal values and out of curiosity, because of passion, which is actually defined as intrinsic motivation. So self-determination in learning says when the students are intrinsically motivated, it helps them develop a sense of autonomy and competence. So that can be said as the most powerful motivation.
What's the difference between autonomous and controlled motivation?
Autonomous motivations comes from the internalized sources. So students do the task out of curiosity because they want to do it, because they're interested in it. And in self-determination theory, autonomous motivation is categorized into three different motivations, which are identified, integrated, and intrinsic motivation. And controlled motivation, on the other hand, is the source of controlled motivation is more from the pressure that is from within or outside, from the outside environment. So it doesn't have to be always the external sources, actually. And we cannot say extrinsic motivation is always negative because when we categorize the extrinsic motivation, there are external, introjected, identified, and integrated motivation. So external motivation is, let's consider the people, the students or teachers watching that video. If you're watching that video because your professor said you need it for the exam and you want to get a good grade, then you'll have an external motivation because you are trying to avoid failing. So kind of avoiding punishments, getting rewarded, that is called external motivation. And then there is introjected motivation. So again, if you're watching that video because you think, you are not under stress by your professor, but you still feel like you need to pass that exam because otherwise you're not a good teacher or you're not a good student. So it comes out of proud or maybe trying to avoid the shame, embarrassment. So it is still the external pressure, but coming from within. So we call them controlled motivation because they are not internalized. They are characterized by force and pressure. On the other hand, we have identified motivation. That's also a part of extrinsic motivation. But it is, you still don't find that video very interesting, very fun to watch, but you think that it is important for your future career. And you need to watch it because it is important for you. So you want to become a good teacher, you want to be able to motivate your students well, that's why. Although you don't like it, you don't find it interesting, it's necessary. So that is motivating you to do it. And we have integrated motivation. It is kind of similar to identified motivation, but it is more like part of your, it is very important for you because it is very important for you to be a good teacher, to motivate yourself. We can give the activism example for that. For example, like going to a protest might not be very funny, but you find it very important because of the topic. So there's identified and integrated motivations and intrinsic motivation are part of autonomous motivation. And it is important to know because as teachers, when we feel like, I need to make the exercise funny, interesting, it is not always possible. Like when there's an exam, it is boring. It is not that possible to make it very interesting, maybe. So as teachers, we have options. We shouldn't think that we need to always intrinsically motivate our students. We can also motivate them by explaining the reasons why that would be beneficial for their, academic life or in future career, so they can motivate themselves in that way, which is like identified or integrated motivation.
In fact, in most of our discussions, we were saying how important it is to move away from models where teachers simply tell students what to do and like you need to do this. and move away from that to a situation where students understand the reasons why they are doing that. That the teacher can give more meaningful explanations
Exactly.
behind the reasons for different things.
Yeah, and like this is not only for students, also for teachers.
Yes.
Because the teachers also should be motivated to teach, to do a certain exercise. And sometimes that can be also hard for us to think, yeah, okay, so I'm not in the mood, I don't have interest in teaching that topic, but we can try to explain ourselves also, like why it is important, and then we can still be autonomously motivated to do it.
How can educators facilitate more autonomous forms of motivation at schools?
Yeah, so we just actually started to answer that. First of all, when we try to motivate someone, we need to understand them. So it is not just like the school context. The empathy is so important, for example, to understand the barriers, the challenges that person is facing, and what motivation means for that person. So first of all, we really understand our students' needs and their challenges that they are facing in their daily life. The second is, as Karen said, to give them meaningful choices. So it is not just, for example, when there is an activity, to give them choices is important, but they should also make sense. Because you can't really lead a person to be autonomous if they don't understand or they are not convinced about that activity. So they need to have the explanation why it matters. The language is important. Like when the teacher is always using, yeah, you must do that, you have to do it that way, or you should, like this kind of language is just giving the impression or the feeling of being under control, under pressure. So you can't really expect the students to be autonomously motivated when you are giving them actually like an obligatory actions or like with that language forms. So it should be more like, it should give the feeling, yeah, you have choices still. And also it should be, the activities should be optimally challenging. That's very important because if one activity is very hard for a student, it is almost impossible to get that student into doing it. Or if it is too easy, that's going to be just boring, so also not there is no motivation to do it. So it should be optimally challenging. So when I'm doing that, it's going to be hard, but I'm going to do it. It is within my capacity, and then I'm going to improve myself. So there should be always an improvement. When the students do not feel that they are learning something, they are not improving themselves, that's also demotivating. And the feedback is very important. It should be informational, not controlling. And the recognition of achievements, it is very, it is like very motivating when you know that someone is seeing you, seeing what you've achieved, even if it is a small thing. So it is basically the easiest way to motivate someone, actually. The cheapest way, the easiest way. Yeah, you did a great job. I see you, I feel you. And yeah, these kind of small, maybe sentences can also help students to be motivated.
What attitudes and skills are needed for self-determination in learning?
So actually they are all more or less in the same, we're just like talking about the same things, but for example, when we think about the teacher's perspective or the educators, it is important to have the awareness of personal strengths and challenges also, and setting the educational goals based on this interests and abilities and the needs of the students. So that is also coming to the optimal challenge and the empathy part. And of course being flexible in and in modifying goals, so we should always remember that we can't really set the same goal for every student in the classroom. We said motivation, so to lead students autonomously motivating themselves. So instead of just putting the pressure and this external motivation, it should be always autonomously motivating. Also the teamwork, the importance of teamwork is necessary to always, the students shouldn't think that they are in a competition and they have to achieve something alone. So it is important to put them together, and it is also motivating to feel like you are giving something to that community, to your group, to your team. So I have also something, it makes you feel more like valued and accepted also. That's why teamwork can also help.
Maybe we can also look at the importance of metacognitive skills in students as well, because for self-determination and learning to kind of work, students need to gain very important skills like being able to, they themselves setting up their own goals, being able to evaluate their learning, their progress, being able to find correct information. And this is especially important now when so much information is kind of accessible, but it does not mean it's the right information either. Yeah. So being able to evaluate different sources of information. So these skills that make you a better learner, so kind of learning how to learn, becomes very, very important for students if self-determination is going to work. And teachers need to invest time in the classroom to ensure that students are also gaining these skills that will set them up for learning for life in
and
reality.
It takes time.
Yes.
It doesn't happen like just one semester trying this, like teaching self-determination and autonomy. It doesn't happen very quickly because this is also not, it is not something that we are used to in our daily life. When you think about the family being like living with your parents, you are not that autonomous maybe, or outside in the community. So it takes time to really trust in yourself actually. Like, I'm capable, I can decide for myself, and I can take the responsibility. The consequences also are results of my decisions. That is something that we should all work on, so it takes time.
And I can plan, because planning becomes very important. I can plan. We started off this video by saying that self-determination sees learning as a personal journey. And whenever you're setting up to go on a journey, you're obviously planning things. You're planning your route. You're planning what you need to take with you. You're planning. So planning becomes a very, very important skill. And also being able to take decisions along the way of what's working and what's not, and leaving things behind that are not working, and being open to try different things, and becoming more aware of yourself also as you're going along, and gaining knowledge of who you are, as not only as a learner but also as a person, and discovering more your interests maybe, and
at the end of their life, in this way they will be able to find their own element. As Ken Robinson said, the element is the place where the things that we are good at and the things that we love come together, and we need to work on this process, because not only for a personal reason, in order to make them more fulfilled, but also as the world evolves, we need to face more and more challenges, and our future as a community and also the future of our institutions will depend on it.
What teaching and learning methods or strategies help educators to promote self-determination?
So in order to fulfill the needs for competence, autonomy and relatedness, we need to create an environment where students can exercise choices, outline personal goals, reflect on their own individuality, and define methods, tracing paths, and also setting routes, all functional to actualize their full potential. And first of all, we need to provide them a range of options and opportunities, and also creating a space where they can exercise a certain amount of freedom and take a decision about their tasks or methods or or opportunities. And all these, this is a good way to foster their sense of competence and autonomy and ownership. Also, it is important to provide them the opportunity to set their own goals and work towards them. These can enhance their sense of competence and also fuels their desire to learn. But in order to reach this goal, it is also important to develop a deeper understanding of their own individuality. And so tools as questionnaires or scales or self-administered tests play an important role. Also referred to cognitive, metacognitive and social dimensions play an important role in enabling them to make informed and responsible choice about their learnings. And another aspect that we should take in consideration is probably scaffolding. We need to gradually reduce our support and guidance during their learning path and enabling them to take more and more responsibility during their learning journey.
We have to always keep in mind that when we say self-directed learning, it does not mean individual learning, but it also means learning with others, collaborating with others. So it becomes very, very important for teachers to recognize this as well and to ensure that they're offering the space and the time for students, for learners to be able to work with others in a team, to collaborate, to work on projects, to be able to support each other, to discuss things together, to have discussions that are even student-led. And this ensures that, first and foremost, the need for relatedness is fulfilled, because it is one of the basic psychological needs. But also it sets up the learner for the reality of life, because we are never working on our own in reality. We're always working and learning and doing things with others. And so we need to be able to not only discover ourselves and the way we work on our own, but also discover who we are as participants in a group, in a team, and how we also contribute to collective works.
It is also about the autonomy. So when we talk about being autonomous in self-determination theory, it is not being independent. So in self-determination theory, autonomy means, because being independent is I can do everything on my own, I don't need the other person. But in self-determination, in learning, being autonomous is to know that, so autonomously choosing to ask for help from the others. Because we know that we have things to give to the other people, share our information, but also ask. And it's okay to, it is also good to ask for the opinions and help from the others.
What are potential challenges or barriers within the school setting to fostering self-determination in learning?
Condition where human beings develop and function can make them more passive and alienated or proactive and engaged. And there are a lot of factors that related to the school context and that derive from the industrial school model that are able to influence the well-being, the motivation, and also the engagement of students. Some of them are the progressive use of the one-size-fits-all approach, or the teaching strategies that don't imply the activation of the students, and also the same pace or the fixed curriculum are able to influence students' motivation. And often in our schools there isn't actually the possibility to exercise choices or to decline personal goals or path. And also the relationship with the teachers becomes even more distant, and this is also a factor that have a huge role on our students' motivation. And also as school level increase, the focus is disciplinary results established on the basis of normative standards that are not the same for all students in many cases. And also the use of frontal lessons gradually become even more present. And these imply a fixation of bodies and minds. And also the setting. I think that
when there is no space, when the space, in a way, the classroom setting and the space setting is not conducive to such collaboration. We were thinking a lot as we were talking and discussing the traditional classroom setting of set rows with the teacher in front, and already sets you up for this transmission method of teaching, where the teacher has the power and the students are fixed and ideally not moving, and they're like there to absorb what the teacher is saying.
What other external factors beyond schooling influence self-determination?
We have to also always keep in mind that schools are not isolated, and that children come to school already with a baggage of experiences and factors that are affecting them. I think the major one must be the family and the home setting. So if the family is already embracing the values of self-determination and openness and discussion and the type of parenting is conducive to self-determination, then students are going to be more open and receptive to self-determination in the classroom if the teacher is going in that direction. On the other hand, if home life and family life and the parenting style is very controlling, then students are going to find it more difficult to kind of encounter an opposing belief system and opposing values at school. Also, families are within a larger context of the culture and society in which they find themselves, sometimes also microcultures of that particular family, which without realizing they shape our belief systems and they shape our values, especially about the roles of specific groups of people. For example, the children versus adults. So in many societies, children are seen as having so much less of an expertise than adults, and it means that their voice is usually less important. And it's what our education system is mostly usually based on, that fact. And the system is based on the fact that children need to be taught by the adult. So there's also, for example, the way that certain cultures and societies views the voices of girls and women, and that might lead to them having less potential for self-determination. Also, persons with disability often, and most studies show that they are usually the persons who have the least opportunities and chances for choice making in their lives, especially if they are non-verbal. They are often seen as not capable of making the right choices for themselves. There's also the personal experiences beyond these, I think, that all the person goes through in their life, like their past experiences, their previous achievements, which might increase their the way they view themselves and their self-esteem. Similarly, failures, past failures may reduce the self-esteem of a person and their potential for self-determination. We also mentioned, and we're thinking of other activities that certain students and children and young people take part in outside of school, extracurricular activities, and maybe involvement with NGOs with aims of empowering children and young people and activist groups. And usually young people who are involved in such activities and NGOs tend to have more self-determination or skills that lead to self-determination in learning then and in school.
How does self-determination in learning relate to student-centred learning approaches?
Self-determination in learning aligns closely with student-centered learning approach because both prioritize the three basic psychological needs for motivation, competence, autonomy, and relatedness, and aiming to power learners to take ownership of their own learning path, and also shape their journey. And this is not only about putting the learners at the center of the learning process, and not only about making them more active, but it is that students, through the exercise of a certain amount of freedom, contribute to determine their learning path, and these affect and shape it for the whole classroom in a really unique way.